All right. We are going to move forward and begin talking about another system that we have here, and that's required and recommended resources. Again, you're going to be able to access these through the curriculum website. Let me first kind of start and talk a little bit about them. They're an essential part of our guaranteed and viable curriculum. Again, another practice that's based in research and as evidence-based. What this does is help ensure that all teachers and students have access to quality materials. Again, this goes back to it shouldn't matter where a student sits in BISD, that they have access to the same level of instruction and materials and resources. It provides consistency and expectation regarding the what and the how of instruction. So let's talk a little bit about what required resources are and what they are not. So when we think about what they are, it is, if it's a required resource, then it means that it is available on every campus. The district provides that, and you're going to find copies of that on your campuses already. Required resources are materials that must be used at some point during the teaching of that unit. Okay, so in your teacher teams during your conversations and planning time, we ground ourselves in professional learning community work here in BISD as well. So when your team is working together, you'll decide when and where and how within that unit to use those, but they will be covered, they will be used at some point during that unit. They've been vetted by the district to ensure alignment to our standards, right? So we vetted those. The components of the required resources were chosen by curriculum council teams, right? So it doesn't mean that we use it cover to cover, right? And again, this is also a big part of how we ensure that all students are getting access to the same materials and information. What required resources are not is that they are not the only materials that can be used during the course of that unit, okay? So we, by design, did not necessarily plan every single day of a unit with a required resource because we want to honor you as teachers and as professionals to be able to bring in other resources that you feel like may be appropriate and important for students to be able to access. It also means that it doesn't mean that we're using every single page of a resource, right? So again, our teacher teams have gone in and found what I call the golden nuggets. They've found the best and the best of that resource. They've tied it directly to a standard within that unit, and those are the pieces that are used. And as we've talked about, it doesn't mean that it's enough material to cover the entire unit, okay? So now let's talk a little bit about what we call recommended resources. Recommended resources may or may not be on every campus. Okay, sometimes there's resources that we've tagged there that may be out on some of our campuses but may not be there for all of them. And they may be used at some point in the unit. So we know that they align with the standards, and so they absolutely are appropriate to be used. Again, it's a teacher choice. So as we talked about, in required resources, we don't maybe have enough for the entire unit. So if you may not, as a teacher, have anything else, then you could always go to the recommended section and be able to find additional resources to consider for the teaching of that unit. Okay, so that was the idea there. What we're also kind of in the process of working on is getting tighter alignment in our required resources to our essential standards that we talked about earlier. So that's really where you're going to kind of see an anchor around required resources will be with the essential standards. Okay, so a little bit about resources. Again, you're going to get introduced to your resources this afternoon when you're with your content specialist. So you'll again hear a lot more about that. So we've talked about our written curriculum. We've talked about the what. We've talked about our resources. I always think of our resources as a bridge. It helps us with the what and the how, okay? But resources alone don't help us with the how. There's also what we call instructional moves that we have to make as teachers to be able to deliver that content and that knowledge to our students. So in BISD, we have a system, again, where we kind of ground ourselves, and we call it the Big 8. So let's talk a little bit about that. So BIG stands for the Bastrop Instructional Guide, and we kind of anchor that around 8 core components or strategies of instructional strategies that we know are, again, evidence-based and great for all of our students. And we anchor this around our BISD acronym. So in that we build background knowledge, we initiate comprehensible input, we have structured student interactions and engagement, and there's differentiation. So a little bit about this is that this is anchored and grounded in sheltered instructional strategies. As you notice that we have about 1/3 of our students that are English learners in our district. That means every one of you sitting here today are going to serve and teach our English learners in your classroom. And so what we wanted to do is not to have this set of core instructional strategies over here and this other set of instructional strategies, right, that we use for our English learners, because we know that these all are good and help deliver the best instruction for all of our students. And so we grounded ourselves in sheltered instruction. So let's look a little bit more at these. When we build background knowledge, we know that both students and adults learn new content better when they can make connections to that new content to what they've learned previously, right? So some of the things that we can do that here is through some of our direct questioning and conversation. A big part that we emphasize here is key vocabulary. We know that vocabulary is extremely important. And we kind of think about vocabulary in a couple of different ways here. Our L team will talk about it in terms of brick and mortar vocabulary. Bricks are those academic content words. So if I teach math, it's words like area and perimeter. Mortar words are those inferencing, I'm sorry, not inferencing, but they're those skill-based words, right? It's kind of what students do with that content, such as inferencing or analyzing. So just kind of know, we look at that and know how important key vocabulary is. We initiate comprehensible input. And through this, what we really want to do is provide opportunities to have students interact with that new content. They may interact with that through having structured conversations. They may also interact with that by using visuals, graphic organizers, or other hands-on materials, okay? But that's some of the focus work that we have here. We have structured student interactions and engagement. So as part of this is ways that we think about, again, that students can work together, maybe through cooperative learning. Another part that we know is important to student engagement is having effective questioning strategies. So not only in the questions that we ask and having higher order thinking questions that meet the level of rigor in the standard, but also how we ask questions. Do we set up all students to think about that question and have all students participate in that conversation and not just rely on students who are raising their hand, right? Being strategic about and making sure that all of our students are engaging. And the last piece that we have is differentiation. So again, we want to make sure and we know that part of a guaranteed and viable curriculum is having all of our students access that content. And so it means having scaffolding approaches and other accommodation approaches to be able to make sure that all of our students can access that curriculum. So there's 4 big concepts that we kind of ground ourselves on in our instructional moves. Within those 4 kind of big concepts, there are 8 kind of key strategies or categories of strategies that we anchor on. Okay? So visual representation, scaffolding, cooperative learning, reading across the curriculum, explicit vocabulary instruction, writing to learn, academic conversations, and higher order thinking questions. So what we do is that we have 2 of these categories of strategies that kind of go with each B, I, S, or D. So let's have a little table conversation, and you all talk about, when I've kind of given, I know, a quick overview of the BISD, but think about how these strategies might be coupled together and where they would fit under the BISD. So I'm going to give you 2 or 3 minutes at your table to have a table conversation. So maybe about 30 seconds to wrap up your table conversations. All right, if we can bring table conversations back to whole group, please, in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so let's kind of look about how we do group these here in BISD. And first of all, to say, there's really no right or wrong answer, and part of your conversation may have been, these could fit under multiple ones, and absolutely that they can. For kind of sake of organization and just to kind of help us be able to anchor ourselves, we do couple two under each one of the BISD. So to build background knowledge, we kind of focus on academic vocabulary and reading across the curriculum. With Initiate Comprehensible Input, we focus on non-linguistic representations, having lots of visuals, and academic conversations. For structured student interaction, we talk about cooperative learning, that too being structured with roles and responsibilities, and higher order thinking questions. Again, both the questions that we ask as well as the structures that we ask them. And then differentiation, scaffolding, and writing to learn. Oftentimes when we ask questions, giving students the opportunity to write before we give them the opportunity to answer lets them collect their thoughts and process, and then sets them up for success whenever we go then to give them the opportunity to respond. So in BISD, we talk about, we kind of focus on what we call the big three of the big eight. Sometimes I call them the huge three of the big eight. And so those are academic vocabulary. You're going to hear us talk a lot about this in our trainings in PLCs, structured academic conversations, and higher order thinking questions. And the reality is those work very closely together. We want students to talk about their new content, and they need to be talking about it using vocabulary. And they have the best conversations when we're asking good higher order thinking questions. So the three of those really work in harmony together. Here is how I think about a big eight. So it's like having this big tool belt. And I don't mean the skimpy tool belts with just one or two pockets. I mean the heavy duty. I mean, we're teachers, we're professionals. We need the heavy duty tool belt. And each of these 8 kind of strategy components or categories are the pockets that we have on that tool belt. We have a pocket for academic conversations and a pocket for higher order thinking questions. And then what we work to do is to build your tool belt and to help you put different tools in these different pockets. There's multiple ways to help us be able to teach academic vocabulary. Again, we ground ourselves in Marzano's 6 steps. So we help put tools in your tool belt to help for you to be able to teach using those Marzano 6 steps. We give you tools to put into your your structured academic conversation so that you have different structures to be able to use to have your students talk with each other. So that's the way that I kind of visualize and think about the work with the Big 8. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we kind of focus right now on the huge 3 of the Big 8, those 3 that I highlighted for you previously. Okay. So one more system that I'm going to visit with you about before passing the baton back to Lila is we're going to talk about lesson plans. And so this is another system that we have in BISD. We have structured lesson plan templates that we use across the district. Okay, so it's the same for all of our campuses. So let's talk a little bit again about the why of lesson planning. What research tells us is that lesson planning is a key feature of effective teaching. And it's evidence of a much deeper and reflective practice that you as teachers engage in preparing to deliver your lessons. It's gone on to talk about that this reflection focuses upon issues that are fundamental to all teaching, which includes the aims. What are we working to accomplish? So you're going to see that called objectives in our lesson plans. The delivery, how are we going to deliver and introduce and have students interact with this new content? We call that instructional moves. What are you as a teacher going to do or to facilitate with your students in that process? The learning processes involved. We work around a gradual release model, an I do, we do, you do model. I'm going to model for you as a teacher. I'm going to model for you, the students. Then we're going to have some guided practice together, and then you're going to be able to work independently. Okay? And then evaluation mechanisms, closures, and checking for understanding. We want to know, did our students learn today what we set out for them to learn in this time period that we were together? So it's ultimately, what does the teacher intend for students to learn? How are you going to achieve that? And did they learn today? Because the more that we're checking for understanding, the quicker we can intervene and be able to address that and keep them on track with the overall learning and goals for the unit, right? So to help with this, the agency, TEA, has also put out in their Effective Schools framework, they also have lesson plan guidance. And it talks also about some of these key components that should be there. They talk about having clear objectives. They talk about having opening activities. How do we kind of grab the attention of our students? Having time allotments that indicate the amount of time spent on each step. Having multiple differentiated paths of instruction to clearly define a curricular goal, including paths to help meet our students that have unique needs, whether they are served in special education or whether they're an English learner or another student group. And then also having daily formative assessments, those checks for understanding to see, did students learn today the things that we set out to learn together. So here is a copy of our lesson plan template that we use. Elementary, ELA, and math, the same components are there. It's formatted a little bit differently. You'll take a look at that this afternoon. You do have a page like this in your handout. So what I wanted to do is just to kind of show you, I've already really introduced to you the components in some of the slides that we've just done. I kind of want to outline this for you, and also I'm going to show you how this aligns with that effective school framework guidance that we've received from the agency. The first section there you'll notice is learning objective. In parentheses, you're going to see TPO for MCP campuses. Again, we love our acronyms, right? Some of you are going to be on campuses that use the model classroom project as an instructional kind of structure for your classrooms. You're going to get more information about that, right? And some of all these letters will make more sense when you're there. But the bottom line is that in our learning objective, again, it's about setting out the intent for our learning for the day. And in this, we do use kind of what we call a three-part objective structure that talks about how we're going to have students engage with the content. And so this also helps us bring in some of the big components of language objectives as well for our English learners. Okay? So, but learning objectives really are, and the intent of those, I always kind of say, I just want to let you in on a little secret. Learning objectives really aren't for your principal or your assistant principal when they come in and do walkthroughs. The learning objectives really are for your students. It is help setting a clear expectation of what your collective goal is as a class for the day about what you want them to learn. Even though I know that's within the bigger context of a unit, and that 45 minutes or an hour for an elementary, what's the goal that we want to accomplish today? Okay? It gives a checkpoint for you all at the end of your time together. The next section is the Big 8 strategies, those Big 8 that we've talked about. And in this section, what you do is you highlight which one of those strategies you're using in this daily lesson today, right? Are we having an academic conversation? Am I spending some time on vocabulary? So now there's more information that you're going to play out later, but right here it's just a highlight of which one you're going to use. The next section is a differentiated delivery, materials, and student product. When you click on that link right there, another document is going to come up. And it's a document that was put together by our special programs. And it too is like a toolkit. So if you have students who have disabilities and are served through special education in your classroom, this is a toolkit that you can go to that aligns with our instructional moves sections below to give you ideas of instructional moves you can make to scaffold or to accommodate for students that are in your classroom, right? You're going to have information to know, like, do they have a comprehension? Is there concern comprehension? Then here are some of the things that you can do to be able to help. And again, throughout the course of the year, we're going to be able to pull this reference and this tool in together as we work in making decisions in our teacher teams as we have PLC meetings. Then the meat of this document is, again, here, what we call instructional moves. Again, the intent of a lesson plan is to really map out how you're going to deliver that information. So whatever big 8 strategies that you chose, you're going to play them out in this section below. If I said they're going to have an academic conversation today, then I'm going to decide, where am I going to do that? Is that going to be part of the we do? And I'm going to use an A-B partner structure to do that. So I'm going to have an A-B partner structured conversation. Here's the question I'm going to use. And here's the sentence stem that I'm going to use so that I'm setting up my English learners for success in that. So your actual instructional moves using that gradual release process are played out in this section below. Okay? So I wanted to take just a couple of minutes and let you look at that template, and also just kind of, you can see here in the maroon boxes, we've kind of connected the Effective Schools Framework components that we talked about previously to show you how they outline with our lesson plan template. The other thing that we worked to do here is to also link for you in the blue boxes the systems that we've talked about today and how they are used to help you in your lesson planning, right? When we think about objectives, you may look more at your YAG. You may look at your essential standards or the unit plan that your teacher team will work to develop as you have a PLC meeting.